Hey everyone, it's the Future here, and today I want to talk a little bit about e-waste and fast fashion. Now, obviously not fashion in the sense of clothing, because that's not really my thing as you can tell, but more fashion as in musical gear and instruments. And a kind of annoyance I found with the entire gear tube environment. So before we get into this video, obviously I'm going to be a little bit entitled here, basically using a flagship class Roland as a set piece and having quite a lot of stuff and being basically in what is just below a 1% income these days. It's kind of hard to not talk about this stuff and come across as someone that is just shitting on people for being poor, which is definitely not my intention. And just to address the elephant in the room, most of this stuff is in fact secondhand, like this JDXA, D50 obviously, a lot of my rec gear is secondhand, the System 1 secondhand, and almost all of my guitars are secondhand. So I'm very much into the keeping things alive ethos in this thing. And before you say, well, you're wearing fast fashion, let me just show you real quickly how long fast fashion lasts for me. This is a original In Flames Soundtrack to Your Escape shirt, which I probably bought in second grade. And yes, this thing is still alive. Like most of my clothing, it lasts quite a long while because I simply don't throw it away and I keep wearing it until it falls apart. So I'm not into the actual fast fashion, and I want to talk a little bit about the more conceptual fast fashion in this video before we get way off the rails. And just to clarify another thing, this little Harley Benton, I would not entirely class it as e-waste, but it's up there. It's getting close to that point. So let's start off with hardware e-waste, because that's kind of easier to understand. There's a lot of gear which is made so cheaply and it's made to such a standard that it is not going to last in the sense of just time passing by, but also in the sense of quality, because you are going to grow out of it. There's a lot of camera equipment, for instance, a lot of synthesizers which are functional to the point of being functional, but not functional to the point of when you develop skills you are going to want to keep it. Same goes with a lot of guitars and other stuff. It is made to such a cheap degree that although it's exceptionally accessible, it's just not objectively good. And I grabbed this pedal because it's basically the only pedal I have which borderlines this class of pedals, because I don't like buying that stuff, because I am very much aware that it is not going to last. Now, just to clarify, this pedal, I get that this is already fairly expensive to some people, and I think for most people something like this is just realistically, I'm holding it upside down, not going to happen. Because again, expensive, cheap. Difference being that the expensive pedal is going to last you basically your entire life because it doesn't have issues, and this pedal definitely has a few. For instance, if you crank this one too much, it becomes literally squealy. It starts to emit really weird high-pitched whines and stuff, which makes it borderline unusable at some settings. And the cheaper you go, the more likely you are to run into these issues. Now, when you're starting out with music gear, this might not be your biggest concern because you're just trying to get into stuff. But once you start to try and be productive, something I definitely feel at as well, you will absolutely run into the issue of things making noises they shouldn't be making. In which case it would have been better to just keep this money, wait it a little bit, and you could spend that money on a second-hand, actually functional pedal, which is something I really strongly want to advocate for in this video. That's just hardware waste, stuff that is objectively not very good, that you will grow out of very quickly. Now, on the bright side, you can offload that to the second-hand market, and potentially people can buy that on the second-hand market. But with my experience, often this stuff is sold basically at new price, at which point people will just buy it new, because why buy something that's subpar second-hand when you can buy it for a few more dollars new? Which happens quite a lot, and I'm definitely guilty of that as well. There are a few things I bought new because the second-hand price was basically the new price, so why bother risking buying something second-hand? Now, conceptual e-waste is a little bit more complicated, and this ties into kind of the fast fashion aspect of music creation, which we see a lot on YouTube. You will see a lot of channels where when something new comes out, they will immediately jump onto the new thing, often proclaim it's some sort of game changer, and it is that one thing that will absolutely change your life, and it will fix all your problems and will make you a better musician, which is quite often not true to start with, but it also creates a trend. And the one thing for me that really made me realize that I was also falling into this trap was this thing here. You've probably seen this on many YouTube channels already. It's a microcosm by Hologram, and the microcosm is one of those pedals which seems really cool when you see the demos and you go, whoa, that's really going to change everything. It's going to make everything more better or something or different. And it's very good at selling the illusion that it is something that will really change things up. Where in reality, it's a very cool pedal, for sure. But I wouldn't say it will change your life. And definitely for the money, it is not going to change how you work. It's still a guitar pedal, it still does guitar pedal stuff, and it's still a thing you need to fit into your already existing workflow. And this is just one example. There are basically new things coming out every, I would say, couple of weeks, probably, where people will proclaim it's the next big thing. And usually you don't see that thing again on that same channel, which is a trap that is easy to fall in as a content creator, because if you want to stay relevant, you need to post what is relevant. And what is relevant is usually the new thing, because that's what people will be looking for. And also because there's just less content about new things around than there is about old things. But this feeds a very unhealthy trend, I think, both into creating very severe FOMO, fear of missing out, but it also fuels the kind of bad trend of companies dropping support the second something has been successful. And I think this JDXA is actually a very good example of that. This is a very interesting, cool synth. Digital engine with a analog engine, although it's one of those modern analog engines, so analog people will probably not accept it as being analog, but whatever. As is, it is pretty good. Actually, it's all right. The problem is Roland, like many other companies, as soon as they make something, they might patch it one or two times, and then it is what it is. So everything that is wrong with this thing has been wrong with this thing for, I would say, 10 years. I'm not 100% sure when they launched this thing, but it's along those lines. And you see this in hardware form, where companies will just stop supporting things pretty quickly. Even more so with pedals, because they're just a pain in the ass to update. There's not even a USB on this. I guess you could potentially update it over MIDI, but I'm not quite sure if they integrated that. And a lot of digital pedals, it is what it is. And when there's a new version, they will just sell you a V2 or V3, which is, by the way, a great time to pick up the older versions if the pedals interest you. But that's beside the point. That's hardware, but it also happens a lot in software, and it becomes even more trending right now with all the services going to subscription-based services. So it's one thing to buy a piece of software and after, I don't know, 10 years, the support drops, which is not that unreasonable. I mean, 10 years is quite a long time to support a product, so I'm going to say if a company actually supports a product for 10 years, that's very good. But with subscription services, you see a lot of abandonment of stuff because it's simply not financially viable to keep supporting the things they've already made. And this happens with a lot of plugins. They just drop it. It's quite often good enough to the point where people use it. And the companies kind of assume that in 2 or 3 years, people will just buy either a new product from them or they will have bought another product anyways. So what I've noticed a lot also in the YouTube gear space is a lot of very quick cycling of plugins. You will see, for instance, Pigments, and it's like, whoa, Pigments, best plugin ever. And then a couple of months later, it's like UVI, best plugin ever. And then they go to, I don't know, Melda, whatever. It moves like very fast, and you rarely see people using old stuff for an extended amount of time. And this is in part because, well, you've got to keep up with the cycle, but it's also in part because companies just don't bother updating their products anymore because for some reason it just isn't viable. And I think it's a very weird, toxic kind of relationship we're getting into with this stuff. We are seeing more and more software which has issues that are not being fixed for a long time. I've seen a lot of stuff about Apple support, for instance. I run Windows, so that's not a big issue for me. But I've seen a lot of stuff about the new Apple Silicon and a lot of programs no longer working, and companies just not bothering to make sure their stuff works for their users. Because after all, you can just buy the new version or get the subscription, and in that case, you can actually use the product. So cool, buy stuff. And that's something that has really annoyed me lately. So also for myself, I think I am thinking about ways to kind of support more conscious companies, more companies that are willing to invest the time to support their products long term. So I'm interested into learning from you which products you have been using for a long time, which software you have been using for a long time. And I want to put more of a spotlight onto those companies instead of the companies that put stuff out there with issues and then just go, well, that's the thing, have a great day. Because it just annoys me. It's such a weird trend that we not only have to deal with hardware which will go obsolete in like a year or something, and well, literal fashion which got out of season within months, but now we also have to deal with software which is basically abandonware on release. It's just really awkward. On the flip side, if you have stories about software which has been abandoned within a couple of years of release or even faster, I would also like to know about that, because I want to make a few videos about some software which is definitely worth investing in because it is a long-term investment, and some software which has faded away before it could ever be any good, like maybe Massive X or something. Yeah, that's my little ramble about the e-waste environment of GearTube. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.